Going to make a simple single dovetail joint drawer. Notice the side rails. That's where the tail is. It runs to help hold the drawer together when you pull it in and out. Just slide in. We have grooves cut in the bottom for the plywood bottom to fit into. Cutting our board for our drawer, you're going to have 4 sides. You want your face to be taller than the sides in the back. You cut it first, full length, full height, and that leaves you to where you trim the top off the rest of the board, which would be this part, about 1 inch. Then you make your remaining cuts for your 3 pieces for your drawers. We're ready to start cutting our dovetails. I like to separate the front pieces, if they're a different length, from the side pieces. And I start with the side rails first with a scrap piece of wood that's the width of a board, 3/4 inch. I put it up there and I trace a pencil line below to show how far I can cut. I do that on both sides. Then use a square to mark 1 inch down. Mark a line across the top of the board. And then, as you can see, the angle cuts. I start cutting what I think is a 45-degree angle, but it can be any angle you want as long as it's steep enough to hold. And I then cut down to the line on both sides. Or use a straight back saw to cut off these ends, because this is the dovetail that we're going to be keeping for our side rails around the length of the drawer. Make sure your saw is parallel so that the lines that you drew on both sides is where the saw edge is, and you keep cutting straight across. So don't be in a hurry and force yourself through making a bad cut hoping to work. We're finished cutting the dovetails on our 2 sideboards. And we didn't have to think very much. I like to start with the sideboards first. When it comes to connecting the front and the back, we need to make sure, and our angles are different, so we have to individually mark them. So we start off marking our board with our template piece of scrap to get our line on how deep our cuts can be. Then we decide which is going to be top and bottom, and inside and outside. So we're going to be looking at the back of the drawer. We're starting with the back rail of the drawer. I mark an X on the outside, mark an X on the top, and I number the joints as I go around, and then you have to line it up and pencil scribe for each joint individually, because they will be different. This is where you have to think and keep track of what you're doing. And then we cut straight down, and that will get us started. Now we're going to use a coping saw to cut down and carefully cut across the bottom. We've done cut our board and cut across the bottom to get this piece out with the coping saw. Came back and cut this little piece out, making sure we didn't cut into our wing. And as you can tell, it's not straight and flat. By not cutting off too much, it gives us a chance to straighten it out with a shear form tool, which will sand that down easily. We're ready for our first dry fit test. When I come up here and line that in, and I feel the bottom, I feel that this is a little bit too high. By cutting less than what you need to, it gives you the ability to adjust. Because this side needs to come down, you can use a wood chisel to very carefully shave this down to make the joint tight and to allow the side rail to come down a little bit. Okay, I very carefully shaved it down, following the principle that cutting too little is better than cutting too much. We have a joint now that isn't it's tight, it's snug, not so tight that you have to really force it. And as you can see, it's flat and flush, which is what we're after. Okay, we've got our 3 sides jointed and together, ready for our front face. This is where things get critical and you have to think through what you're doing. And we've taken our drawer, making sure which is going to be the top and the bottom. You line up the bottom. It's critical here because we've cut the front face, or we did not cut the front face, so it's going to be taller than the side. So you need to be sure what bottom is bottom. And as usual, we mark the joints. We pencil in our tail here. And you want to save your sawdust because they never turn out perfect. And your last resort, if you cut off too much, is wood glue and sawdust to fill it in. And as you can see, I've already cut with my coping saw. Cut this out, and that's as good as I can get. And I'm going to use the shear form to get this flat in here and follow the same principles of shaving that joint using the chisel, but cutting as little as I can to get as close and as tight a fit as I need. Now we're ready to use a router to cut the groove on the inside, bottom of the edges of the sides of the drawer for our plywood bottom to eventually fit down inside this 1/4-inch groove into all the sides. I set up a template to make it quick and easy. I use C-clamps to make sure my piece doesn't move, and cut them out quickly and easily. We now have our drawer assembled, all the joints assembled. We're ready to cut out our bottom of our plywood. And since we know that we've cut the grooves into the boards at 1/4 inch, we get a square and we bump it against the side rail, come over to here. Whatever the measurement is, we know we add 1/2 inch. We're getting into critical mass here. Whatever you cut your bottom, get it as close to square as you can. Now I've made this out of scrap board, so I have 2 of them glued together. But I use a framing square because its long length really provides accuracy to make sure you cut that square. That will really hamper you from getting your drawer to square up if it's not square. I use a jigsaw to have a lot more control cutting it out. Now we're ready for assembly. I suggest you dry fit all your parts several times so you can see all the problems you're going to have as you try to assemble it. And I checked my joints, and some of them are a little bit loose and a little bit sloppy. But remember that sawdust we saved? Well, you put it in a little container, add enough wood glue in there to keep it less than the consistency of peanut butter. You want it to not run, but you don't want it so stiff it's going to dry up before you get anything done, and it's going to hinder the joints fitting together. You want it to be able to just ooze out so you can get rid of the excess. And now I try to lay all my parts out so I know where they are, and I won't have to be fidgeting and try and figure out which way they point. Okay, I'm down to the last piece. I like to start my assembly by having side rail on the bottom, so when I finish up it will be the side rail, because with the way the tails are cut, it's going to come straight down to finish holding the drawer together. All that parts have worked good. Also, I like to put the wood glue in the hole cut instead of on the dovetail. I like to put it inside and let it squeeze out. And everything should fit together, and here's the final piece to assemble. I'm going to make sure it's square after I get it all together and let it dry in place. Final word, you do not glue the inside edge where the bottom rests, you only glue your joints. And here we have a little bit oozing out, and you just get a popsicle stick, scrape that off, And there you go.